corp, they've got different documents. I don't think we're really going to talk about those too much today, because really it would be my advice that any musician starting out, any band, any artist, go with an LLC to begin. And Michelle, if that's different from your perspective.
No, I think that's great. So one of the things I love about the LLC in particular is that the LLC gives the maximum amount of flexibility. If I start out as a single member LLC for tax purposes, for legal purposes, I'm an LLC. I do all the same things, but I'm disregarded for tax purposes, which means I just file a Schedule C. And if I start out as a single member LLC and then add additional people via a band, for example, then it's very easy to get people in and out of the LLC in terms of going from a single member to a multi-member LLC. So I love it. The flexibility is there. It is, from a tax standpoint, one of the most complex tax parts of the tax code do belong to partnerships, but what that really means for most people is that a well-executed operating agreement, and I always tell people that it's always easier, I think that you probably would agree with this, it's much easier to negotiate what happens when you and I have a disagreement when we're not having a disagreement. So if we do that, if we talk about, hey, we're gonna put this band together, this is what we're gonna do, this is how we're gonna get into it. There's too many complicating factors to go into it, but the simplest fact is we update our operating agreement, we have multiple members, now we file a Form 1065, now everybody gets a K-1, we decide that we want to break up, we look to the operating agreement says here's what happens whenever we break up, and everybody goes home without a bunch of meetings with accountants and attorneys, which can get very expensive.
Exactly. Yeah. And I don't want to digress too much here, but I feel like maybe it's necessary to talk about what gets us to the point of starting an LLC to begin with.
Yeah.
I mean, when I pick up a guitar and go busk on the corner, I'm kind of in business. You know what I mean? I'm
Yep.
performing a commercial activity. I'm sure the IRS would probably want their piece. An insurance company would look at that differently than if I were playing in my house. This is considered a commercial activity. So at that point, I'm kind of a DBA, actually. I'm kind of Chris Newberg busking on the corner on this particular day. You can create a DBA. You can create a business just by coming up with it and saying, hey, I'm a business now. That's not really the right way to do it, though, if you actually want to take advantage of all the things that the law, I guess, affords to LLCs, to corporations, and whatnot in terms of tax treatment and liability treatment. So really, I mean, LLCs are so cheap to file. It's like $50, to file a document on your own. I'd recommend you probably call someone or get some good advice on how to do it. But it's not expensive. You set it up, and you have the maximum amount of liability protection that you could ask for with any business structure. Whereas you don't get that with the DBA. If you're on tour and you get into a car accident, it's not going to affect you personally, just because it's your band. It's going to affect the band. So that's, from a legal perspective, that's why we always recommend starting businesses for the liability protection. There's a lot more to it as well, and there are long-term tax benefits to starting a business as well. But Michelle, is there anything else that you want to add about why it makes sense to actually form a proper business?
Well, I think that for one thing, we know from history that every business that operates, that starts out and tries to operate on I don't want to use the term legit, but businesses that pay attention to the details as they get started, whether they be a band or a manufacturer or a restaurant, they tend to be more successful in the long run. And I think that probably part of that is because if you spend the first 6 years of your life trying to figure out the right thing to do, you're going to spend a lot more time than if you just take that time at the beginning. How do I keep my books? How I'm going to do this? What's the best way to do this? Am I doing all the things the right way? You're actually going to spend less time in the long run operating your business. And we just know from history that people are more successful when they do that. And A really good example, I think, of that is going to segue into something else that we talked about, and that is one of the things I've seen this year. Probably 8 times already in 2020 is the lack of an operating agreement and the lack of a clause related to what is known as unreimbursed partnership expenses. And the best way to kind of talk about this is that whenever we have expenses, whenever we have income and we have expenses, these expenses go into buckets. That's one of the easiest way to kind of think about it, right? I'm in a band. I get this money playing my band. This band sells merch. This band has its expenses. This band does this. And everything related to those activities goes into the band bucket. I also have this side project over here. I'm playing, when I'm not on tour, I'm playing locally, just on my own. I'm just doing this solo thing. I have solo merch. I have solo things. I have solo expenses. So my income related to the solo endeavor is in this bucket. My income and expenses related to the band endeavor is in this bucket. And they're two different buckets. So, when we talk about unreimbursed partnership expenses, the tax rules say if a partnership has expenses, and to the extent that a partnership has expenses and reimburses its partners for those expenses, it gets to take that tax deduction. To the extent that individuals pay their own expenses, they're not paid through the partnership and they're not referred to in a partnership agreement. Those actually are non-tax deductible expenses. So we need our operating agreement, two really common clauses for bands is the home office deduction, which we can talk a little bit more about the home office, but basically, if I have a company and that company has a corporate office, well, the company is going to pay for that office and nobody else would be eligible. Well, most bands don't have a corporate office, right? If they're on tour all the time, a lot of times their corporate office is their van, right? But they're also, when they're home, they have a place where they're writing their music, where they're doing all the things that they do. And without a clause in the partnership agreement that says, hey, we don't actually, all the partners in this band are responsible for their home office deductions, the individuals actually aren't eligible to take those home office expenses. Another really good example are things like music and strings. I know a lot of bands where the individuals are responsible. They buy their own instruments, they buy their own strings, they're responsible for kind of their tools of the trade. Now, anything that's on stage, the band owns, but because when I'm not playing with that band, when I'm doing my side thing, I'm also playing that instrument. So a partnership agreement may say, to the extent that partners have, I was going to say medicinal, I have no idea why that came to mind, musical instruments, and anything associated with those musical instruments, they're responsible for their own expenses, which would then allow them to deduct that inside of their own bucket as an unreimbursed partnership expense. Now, I just covered a very complicated subject in about 3 minutes, but the important thing is that partnership agreement, the operating agreement, actually has to say and spell out what those expenses are.
Yeah, that's a lot of good points, Michelle. And when we talked about that last week, I wasn't aware that was something that had to be spelled out. I guess my accountants have been doing our taxes a little funny for a while. You don't want to do that. You just want to get it right. I mean, it's so easy to just incorporate that clause into the contract. I guess maybe the walk away point here is the partnership agreement, the operating agreement is a very complex document. This is not something that you want to just go find on Google and download. And I've litigated cases with those, and they're disastrous. I mean, they don't accomplish anything that the signers want them to accomplish. They really just make things worse. And sometimes they have like a choice of law provision that's like Kansas or something. And it's just totally arbitrary. Don't do it. I mean, we can help you with that. These are not expensive documents. You might as well get it right now.
Well, and that was one of the things that you and I had talked about. There's a very easy fix. There's a very easy response to this. And when I get new clients and they come to me and they say, hey, I've got this K1, the very first thing I ask them for is, I need a copy of your operating agreement. And this past year, 7 of the 8 people that I talked to did not even have an operating agreement available. And they said that I was the first person in, 4 to 6 years that were saying, I need to see this in order to be able to prepare your taxes. And so that's one of the things that really I really want to talk about this particular thing because it's coming up for me so often. I always tell people, having a discussion with me does not mean that you're going to get audited. You're no more liable to get audited today than you were yesterday. But once you know the answer, it's a little bit more difficult to say to the IRS, I didn't know I needed to do that. Because in an audit, this is a highly litigated thing. In an audit, the IRS would say, if in fact there is if there's no clause in your agreement that says that the partners are responsible, or even worse, the band sometimes reimburses and sometimes doesn't, it would not be tax deductible.
Yeah,
so it's a very important concept.
Yeah, and that's problematic. I mean, not just because we want to look good in the eyes of the IRS. I mean, musicians do face tax trouble sometimes, and a lot of times it comes from making a ton of money, not paying taxes, and then being stuck with the debt forever, I guess. But really, I mean, it can help you to have it set up properly. You know what I mean?
Oh my gosh.
Like, taking advantage of the overall tax scheme. I mean, look at we all get upset that rich people don't pay very much in taxes. I mean, let's strive to try to do that if we can, right? I mean, there are benefits to you, not just remaining compliant. There are actual financial benefits that you can realize as an artist.
There are, and just to kind of to take that just a step further, the year of COVID has really brought forth a number of issues related to self-employed people. And, part of it, I could say there's so much buying a car, buying a house, but the number of telephone calls and conversations that I had with musicians earlier this year who really did not have a good handle on how much they make, did not have good business records, and they were trying to get, the PUA or trying to get a PPP or whatever the particular issue was, the people who had good handle on their financial and tax and business records were much easier to pivot this year during the year of COVID and getting financial assistance. And there's more coming. I think that there is more coming. There's several acts in front of Congress right now, and when the Senate comes back, they said they're going to do something. The more that musicians can kind of equate the business of what I do as the required ancillary to the creative part of what they do, the easier it is for them to recognize and reap the benefits of those things, like buying a house, buying a car, finding a band, managing a band. I'm going to kind of bring you in here for a second because you were a tour manager. The difference between being able to properly run a band on the road with adequate financial knowledge, there's no comparison. I mean, it's like the difference between reacting to every day and preparing for every day.
Yeah, it's funny how when you're paying attention, things add up and they really do make a difference. I mean, we were meticulous about saving receipts, and we all had apps on our phones, and it's something that we were really conscious about, and it definitely does help. And if you put a system in place on the road, I know it's easy to lose things. It's hard to have time to slow down and take inventory and track of those things, but really figuring out a realistic system where you can track that stuff, it's worth paying, the fee for the monthly app if it makes your life easier, and you're not trying to find physical receipts all the time. Just do what works and stick with it, because it really does matter. And Michelle does my taxes. She knows. She's stuck with me forever now.
Well, you do a good job, though. I mean, you do a good job of getting the information, and I think part of it's just because of your experience as a tour manager, right? Because you recognize how important it is.
Well, yeah, and I think too, if we think about how much like a semi-successful touring band makes, if you start to add up the cost of being careless with your accounting and bookkeeping work, it gets really expensive. Like, let's say that you're making 200 grand, like let's say that you gross 200 grand a year in shows. I mean, if that's like, most of the weekends in the year, you're probably spending most of your money on travel. You might have like $150,000 in travel expenses or, cumulative expenses. You don't want to pay taxes on $200,000 of income or $100,000. You want to pay your taxes on just the income that you netted, just the money that went into your pocket. And I think for a lot of musicians, it is tempting to want to just try to kind of hide some of that money and keep it under the radar, because filing taxes, they're just going to take a third of everything. It's like, well, they're not really taking a third of everything. It's just the net. But not only is it good to do your taxes from a legal perspective, and I would certainly recommend you do so, but realistically, I guess anecdotally, when I was, my wife and I were buying our house 3 years ago, I had my band income on there, and as it turns out, being a 1-person or 4-person band, I think at that point it was a 5-person band. We weren't making a ton of money because we were traveling so much, but I had 3 years of income on my taxes to show that I was generating income, and that added to my, improved my debt to income ratio and enabled me to buy the house that we're in. So, if you want to make this a career, you got to sort of treat it like one, and it'll pay off like one.
That's a really, what you just said really made me think about something, and that is the number of times people tell me, oh, I don't have to declare my tip income. I'm like, well, that's not really what the IRS says. Income is income, whether it comes in the form of cash or whether it comes in the form of merch sales or it comes in the form of a guarantee, or these are all, income is income. And just like you were saying, we don't want to pay any more taxes than what, we're legally required to pay. But that income can be very beneficial whenever you're looking at things like buying a car, buying a house, what we learned this year in the year of COVID in terms of trying to get financial assistance. So income is income, and it's income whether it comes through Venmo, whether it comes through cash, whether it comes through PayPal. It does not matter how that comes. And for musicians, I've had many people say, well, I don't have to claim that income because it was donated to me by fans. I'm really sorry to tell you, but donations from fans is still considered income.
And you want to count them as income.
Yeah.
I know you don't want to be taxed on it, but we're talking about making this a lifelong career, maybe, or
Right.
at least maybe if you're starting a business and if you're taking it seriously and you're generating money, hopefully it's at least a job, if not a career. If you want it to be effective at that, you got to treat it like that. And
well, even things like talking
about
to right, but even things like talking to a booking agent. Whenever we're talking about what kind of money, what kind of things, how am I generating my income? How is that income generated? What do I have? All of these things are really great discussions with managers, booking agents, whatever, just in terms of the business itself. Even aside from the legal side, even aside from the tax side, there's a certain amount of business knowledge that is very beneficial in having those discussions with people that you're trying to get into your corner. Because the more an agent, a manager, and the more that these people see you as a business person, in addition to the creative side of what you do, the better off it is. And one more thing I wanted to say, one other thing that's really come up this year, I encourage people to look at, Venmo is very attractive because they don't charge fees. PayPal, friends and family, very attractive because there's not a fee. Venmo is a person to person. It's an individual platform, not a business platform. And if you Google, can I use Venmo to accommodate for business transactions? It very specifically says no. It very specifically says if we find that you are using transactions for services, for the sale of concert tickets, and this is for the sale, not for reimbursing your friends. Okay, there's a difference. But if they find that there's commercial transactions, Venmo actually reserves the right to take the income from both sides and not fulfill that not fulfill that transaction. So I encourage people, if you're using Venmo, to at least understand how you're using it and what you're using it for. The other piece is the kind of an ancillary to that. PayPal is a business form for businesses. If you're a business, you have to show that you're a business. But the PayPal Friends and Family is not, they're designed not for business transactions. So, for example, if I pay you my bandmate, let's say that we're not an LLC, where I'm just paying you on the side as a sideman, and I pay you through PayPal Friends and Family, I've got to give you a 1099. If I pay you through a normal business-to-business transaction, I don't have to include that on a 1099. Really starts getting complicated, but I just encourage people to understand the difference between individual transactions versus business transactions and what that can mean to you and the individual transactions that you use for that.
Michelle, while we're on the topic of taxes and keeping track of expenses, are there any apps that you recommend to musicians? And I'm not just teeing this up for you.
Yes.
I'm actually wondering.
Well, I can tell you, I have a love-hate relationship with QuickBooks Online. There's one of the things that I very much like about this is that it is a very common and recognizable online software. You can use it on your phone, you can use it on your tablet, you can use it on your desktop, and you can actually connect your receipts right to the transactions as you go along, and it's going to give your tax preparer what they need in order to prepare those taxes at the end of the year. It's going to need to include reconciliation. Many of my musician clients are like, seriously, I didn't even know what reconcile was till I met you, and now that's all you talk about. But it's a very important aspect. There's other that one kind of does the whole thing in terms of you can track your mileage on there. I think that there's better apps than QuickBooks for the mileage. QuickBooks has a self-employed version. I do not recommend it at all. I wouldn't even look at it. The other QuickBooks Online products are great. I do like mileage apps, like there's a MileBug and MileIQ. Both of those are very good apps, and with just two apps, with the mileage app and a QuickBooks app, an artist or a band, or they can have everything that they need.
Yeah, that's how. Did you say the QuickBooks one was free? The QuickBooks Online?
No, unfortunately, it's not free.
Okay.
It's going to be anywhere from. They sell that stupid employed version, which I can't even tell you how much I hate that particular version. It goes anywhere from like 20, like 35 to 70. If you find a QuickBooks Pro Advisor, you can get it for half the price. So there's my little tip to you: work with a CPA or a tax preparer who's also a QuickBooks Pro Advisor, and they can help you get started on QuickBooks Online for about half the cost.
Is that per month?
Michelle?
Per month, yeah. I would say 20 to 35 is going to be the cost of that. If you need multiple companies, QuickBooks Online isn't the best for multiple companies. There's actually a hosted version of QuickBooks that allows you, if you were to have, let's just say that you had multiple band activities, there's other options. But for one company, online, touring musicians, QuickBooks is really a fantastic, and you can be connected. I've got clients that I'm connected to them all the time. So if they have a question or a concern about how do I treat this transaction or what do I do, they call me or send me an email, and I just pop right into their data and look right at it.
Awesome.
Michelle, I have a couple of questions, actually.
Okay.
One is from Nick James. He's using QuickBooks Self-Employed right now, and
Yep.
he wants to know what's wrong with it and
All right.
what would you recommend instead?
So what I don't like about the QuickBooks Self-Employed is that you only have to have one side of the transaction, and it does not require you to reconcile your books. And one of the very first times that I ever worked with someone on QuickBooks Self-Employed, what happened was that I got all the information, I took all the reports, and had a discussion. I was like, you did not tell me that you made this much money. I don't understand. I feel like we're having multiple conversations. And the issue was that all of the transactions had doubled in the QuickBooks Self-Employed. And the reason is he didn't know it. He didn't even know what to look at. And the reason that it had happened is because the QuickBooks Self-Employed only requires one side of the transaction. It just doesn't even make sense. You can't have, you're limited to what they say is categories. So you're stuck with their categories. There's no balance sheet, and there's no way to reconcile the bank account. So that's the reason, because it's very difficult for anyone to know that they have a problem without that double-sided transaction and without the reconciliation. So that's the reason that I don't like it. I only have one way to get information out of QuickBooks Self-Employed. And my recommendation is use a regular QuickBooks online product like the Simple. I think that they keep changing their names. It's rather annoying, but just use one of the other products, the regular online, which allows you to reconcile an account so that we can see whether or not there's an issue. And if you want to just think about it this way, yep.
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Just when you consider that many musicians have a bank account, a Venmo account, a PayPal account, perhaps a Square account, if we can't verify what the balances are and the transactions that are coming through those four, how do we ever know if the amount of income that we're picking up is correct or incorrect? And like I said, one of my very first time of looking at the QuickBooks Self-Employed, the musician had double the transactions, and he didn't know. He didn't know until, I started asking questions, and I started digging a little bit more into that software, and I have not recommended it since.
That makes sense. I wanted to ask you, I know a lot of us, it's been a weird year. We all had to deal with unemployment and learn and navigate what that is going to mean for our taxes this year. And I wondered if you could speak to particularly the people who maybe have done their taxes themselves in the past or used something like TurboTax. This year, what's the benefit of going to someone like yourself or an accountant versus doing them with TurboTax or something like that? Or is there a benefit at all?
Well, I would say I'll give you my my short sarcastic answer that whenever I talk to musicians and can you find someone that can play the piano at your wedding? Yes. Do you want a professional musician, someone who does that for a living? Or do you want to get your second cousin's, sister's friend who can play Claire Delise on the piano? So, there's professional, whether it be an attorney, there's many things that we can do. That doesn't necessarily mean that we should do them. So one of the things that's going to be different this year for many musicians is just the number of buckets in which the income comes from. We're going to have unemployment. We're going to have the live streaming. We're going to have potentially you had your touring in January, February, early March. You may have a PPP. You may have some other part-time jobs or other things that you've had to do. So I think just the sheer number of buckets that income is coming from this year is why seeing someone who this is what they do for a living is important. You absolutely can do it through TurboTax. As I was a partner in a CPA firm, transitioned to a CFO, and so I had a year in which I didn't have access to my professional tax preparation software, and so I was like, I'll just use TurboTax this year. And had I prepared the return the way that it was I was answering questions and it was leading me down a path. I would have prepared my own return incorrectly. And the only reason I knew that is because I had used a different, different software. So I personally believe very much in, it's very self-serving though. I believe in talking to, CPAs, tax preparers. I believe in talking to attorneys and doing things and just going to people who have been doing it and who understand what all those different buckets actually mean.
Yeah, let's face it. I mean, this isn't the easiest industry to navigate in terms of how to do your taxes. I mean, it's not like you're just getting a W-2 at the end of the year and you've got one job and you could probably figure it out. We've got, I mean, if you're filing taxes, through an LLC or something, you're going to have a self-employment aspect of your tax return, and that's not a walk in the park. That's tricky,
right.
Especially when you're trying to squeeze deductions in that you rightfully deserve. Hopefully, the documents are set up to get you those. But I've worked on TurboTax before, and it can be very difficult if you're self-employed to try to figure out where to even go, let alone how to do it.
Well, and one of the things that they say is we guarantee that you'll do your taxes right, but the fine print says as long as you answer the question correctly. Yeah. And that's why they pay out so little, is because they say, oh, well, you didn't answer the question correctly, even though the question leads you to answer a certain way. I think that's just it. I think that's it. And the same thing. I don't sit around and practice my guitar anymore, but I do. I mean, I'm a nerd. I'll admit it. A tax geek. I prepare tax returns, and I do a lot of them, and so I know how to play the chord on a tax return.
Well, if it makes sense to kind of pivot, I think maybe we've talked about sort of like bookkeeping and taxes in the context of being a band or an artist generally. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about some of the filing issues and some of the other operating agreement / partnership agreement issues that come up, because again, like you said, Michelle, the majority of the people you worked with last year, it sounds like, didn't even have an operating agreement, which no. Shocks me, because I start a lot of businesses for people. It's like a really, pretty easy process for a lawyer to do. And, whether you're trying to grow microgreens in your house or you want to start a trucking company, whatever, the process is pretty much the same from my perspective when it comes to filing the paperwork. But I see so much confusion surrounding it. Sometimes I'll get tagged in questions, and on Facebook or in like the different groups around there and whatnot. There's just so much confusion about the difference between an LLC, an S Corp, a C Corp. I see people on the fence. It's like, well, I'm thinking about going a C Corp route, but I might just DBA. And it's like, both those are terrible decisions. Like, you don't want to do either of those. And then you've got people encouraging them to go the C Corp route or the DBA route. It's like, stop taking your advice from Facebook. I understand people are trying the best they can, but really, I mean, it doesn't have to be that hard. You go and you file an LLC. If you're an individual, if you're a band, the process is pretty much the same in terms of what you file with the state. It's pretty much the same in terms of how you get your EIN, although there's some different boxes to check. But the beyond the legal technicalities, I guess, is making sure that you're on the same page with everybody that you may be signing a partnership agreement with. And this is a problem that I see come up a lot. Musicians are an interesting group of business people because they're super creative, and there tends to be drama in band relationships that you don't find in other sort of partnerships and business relationships. It's because we're all very passionate. I mean, it's because we love this, and we, maybe we're all just too creative for our own good. I don't know. But you have to account for these things, and as uncomfortable as it is to have these conversations, it's important to have them up front. I mean, for one, if you're a band, is there a front man to the band? Is there like a person whose band it is? I mean, or was it more organic? Like, oh, just 5 people came together and we all started the band at the same day. There's not like a real leader. things like that sort of govern how I would urge, someone to draft a partnership agreement. Because when you draft a partnership agreement and you make every single band member a partner in the company, they're going to own that percentage of the company no matter how much you hate them in the future. I mean, if they do something and they want to leave the band, you might have to pay them, you might have to write them a check for their membership interest. And that's generally the way it goes. So the question is, do I want this to be a partnership? If I'm like a band leader, if I'm like the person that, okay, I'm going to start a band and I want to, have this person in it and this person in it, it may not be the best idea to make them all partners at first. And again, this is very subjective, really, but you want to be cautious of that. You don't want to get married too early.
Well, that's exactly it. It's like being married.
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes you just don't know how it's going to turn out. But except in a marriage, there's only one other person. But in a band, there could be 5, 6, however many other people. And what happens is at the onset, it just from kind of my own experience and what I've seen, in my work, percentages are set out, maybe equally up front. And then as things progress years down the road, this person starts to feel like they're not getting enough because they contribute more than the other people. And these are the things that tear bands apart. And frankly, I mean, if I were a band leader, I think the way that I would do it is make it a sole proprietorship, and then like a one-member LLC, not have any partners, and then hire them and then pay them as independent contractors. Then again, if it were a band where we're all like, really gung-ho, really on the same page, and it won't work without any one of us, it probably makes sense to make it a band, or a partnership. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and there's things that we can do inside that partnership agreement to make it equitable. One of the reasons why band members do get, not just, I'm just going to say all businesses, but you're right, in which the more creative people are, the more difficult some of these things become. But if you're paying for everybody's food and you have someone in the band who always gets that extra beer, I'm just using this as a stupid example, then people start to resent that, right? They're like, well, we never get beer. Our food is this much. Your food is this much. And there's such easy way to deal with those types of issues through just saying, we're going to give everybody $20 a day for their food. If it takes you more, you spend more, but we're going to give everybody $20 a day. And then those individuals keep track and they pay it for it as an unreimbursed partnership expense, right? Because then they can deduct what they actually spend based upon what they actually do. So you're absolutely right. The more that you can have these discussions up front, integrate them into that operating agreement, integrate potential disagreements into that operating agreement, and everybody does this when they have a smile on their face, it is going to be so much easier when you get 3 days down the road and somebody says, you know what, I got these family obligations, now I need to stay home. Because if you're going to start bringing up those discussions at that time, the discussions are going to go, well, you've always taken more. These things have always happened this way. And that's the wrong time. The absolute worst and wrong time is to start having those discussions when somebody wants to walk out the door.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think to your point, Michelle, too, actually having the discussion, not just getting a well-drafted partnership agreement that you get from a lawyer, or maybe you happen to find the one good one online if there is one. I don't know. But it's about actually talking about these things and making sure that you're on the same page, because these are rules that you're all going to have to live by. I mean, you're writing the laws of your own existence. And like you say, you don't want to make the laws when you're trying to enforce them, or else they'll just never work. It'll just never stick. It'll be a disaster. And I've seen that play out a number of times with bands.
Me too.
And the thing is, it destroys the band, because if it were a multi-million-dollar business, yeah, you could bring in litigators and you could battle it in court and figure out who the winner is, and they can take all the chips and walk away. But if we're not talking about a multi-million-dollar band, yeah, we're going to destroy relationships. We're going to destroy finances. I mean, you don't want to get into that fight. You want to avoid that fight altogether. And the best way to do it is to make sure that you've got a good roadmap. And really, that's kind of what the partnership agreement is. It's your roadmap for conducting business in a partnership.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And one of the things that you had brought up early on is the fact that you love the LLC. So do I, because the LLC, there are some very good tax planning opportunities outside of partnership taxation, but they're going to be something that someone's going to want to guide you through, and there's a lot of critical choices that occur. But with an LLC, the IRS has what they call check the box regs. So I can start out as a single member LLC, check the box and become a multi-member LLC, and then check the box to become taxed as a corporation with further election to be taxed as an S corp. So all of these things can be done inside of the LLC as a band, if a band were to become, if you had so much money, that somebody's like, hey, we need to start looking at some tax planning opportunities for you, whether it be, putting you on payroll and taking some distributions, retirement planning opportunities. All of these are just different depending upon what type of tax entity that you're sitting inside.
Now, Michelle, this is kind of a difficult question. I've had an unfortunately few number of clients ask the question, just because the only people who are asking this question are ones who have really broken through the ceiling. And I mean, I've got one guy who's just crushing it on Spotify and YouTube, just tens of thousands of dollars a month in royalties, and he's now making so much money that he doesn't know how to handle the business side of things, even though we kind of got him set up, all right early on. At a certain point, does it make sense to be taxed, as an S corp? My understanding is that part of your pay would be payroll, and the rest could, be considered perhaps a stock distribution or something like that is maybe taxed more beneficially.
So, in an S corp, the taxation at an S corp level, the IRS says you pay yourself a reasonable salary, so we have to do payroll. Okay. And then to the extent that you have income outside of that, then you potentially have what they call S corp distributions. The difference is the income inside the S corp is taxable, whether or not it's distributed. The difference is the self-employment taxes. All right. And so just, as we start getting into S corps, things like, are we trying to maximize our retirement? Because if we're trying to maximize our retirement, then we're going to get our payroll up to the maximum allowed in a particular year. Right now, that's $280,000. So there's a lot of an S corporation is a legit tax planning opportunity. It has more responsibilities for how people get their money outside of the company. So, for example, in the form of payroll, which I would not have any band pay payroll unless there was enough income to support that type. So, for example, if I have payroll, I can get my money out through a paycheck or an S corp distribution, and that decision has to be made before I write the check. If I have an LLC and I'm taking a guaranteed payment or I'm taking a partnership distribution, I just write my check.
Yeah,
two completely different ways of looking at it.
So if you're going to go the S corporation route, obviously you're going to have more formalities in terms of how you're paid. I mean, you actually have to hire a payroll company and run it through payroll.
Yeah.
Or maybe do it yourself, right? As long as you're withholding properly.
Right. Yeah. But then you've got quarterly. Now you've got quarterly payroll tax returns. You've got your payroll tax deposits. You've got. I tend to see people in S corps who have been around a little bit longer, only because we have some idea of how to handle it. So I've got a client who is an S corp. We pay them once a quarter. We just take a look at what they do. We take a look at what they've made. We do a paycheck once a quarter. We make our deposits. We file the quarterly tax returns, and that's how we do it for him. But he's been around for 20 years, and so we have a pretty good idea of what we're doing and how we're doing it. And his income is, I'm not going to say that it's stable. I don't know anybody who is, but we know what the range is going to be.
Sure. Okay. As a general rule of thumb, just because I don't know, I don't really want to leave anybody with any questions, as to whether or not I'm on the line between an LLC or an S corp. Let's just say that it's like a single member LLC, one person, one artist. Is there a net income level? I guess when I say net income, I mean net, like not
Yes.
counting what you'd pay in payroll to yourself or what you're paying yourself.
My general rule of thumb, this is just a general rule of thumb, and I can give you two examples different, but general rule of thumb, I start looking at 70 grand. 70 grand take home for one person before I start looking at whether or not an S corp is a good option. And the reason for that is because we have to pay a reasonable salary based on all the facts and circumstances, right? And I'm already paying, I have to pay that, I'm paying the 15.3%, half through my payroll and half through the company. So I'm still, that's your self-employment taxes right there. So there's no magic self-employment amount, right? The difference is that if I'm making 100 grand and I pay myself a reasonable salary of 70, I can take the 70 subject to the payroll taxes, and I can take the 30 as an S corp distribution.
Sure, and I think that the end goal being that eventually you'll be taxed less hard if you go that route and if your income starts scaling up. Correct? I mean, that's why we're doing this.
Well, it's that self-employment. It's the one half of the self-employment taxes that are actually at issue there. So, again, with an LLC, if you're seeing a tax preparer each year, then, I mean, sometimes that's just part of the annual. We take a look, not just for musicians, but for everyone. We take a look and say, what's your income this year? Is there any reason right now to look at something different this year versus what we did last year? Do we check the box and become taxed as an S corporation? Things like the rules regarding what an employee is and how an employee is treated. The rules for what kind of benefits, fringe benefits do I have? So what kind of exposure do I have if I say I'm an employee and nobody else is an employee? There's just a lot of discussion around that, but an S corp can be a very effective tax planning tool.
Great, yeah. Yeah, that's helpful, and we'll have to talk more about that after too, because I've got some people who might need to get some advice on that. But yeah, I think we're all trying to just figure out how to walk away with as much money as possible if we don't have to pay taxes, right?
Right. But good record keeping, I'll just say, good record keeping is your best defense. Good record keeping is your best defense for paying less in taxes. Tracking mileage and keeping track of all your expenses. That is. That when people say, how do I pay less in taxes? That's my first answer for that's where you start. If you can't have good records and you can't keep track of your mileage, it's not going to matter what else that you do. I mean, we can't fix, it's like having a musical instrument without strings. You have to have the strings, right?
Yeah. Well, and part of that too, I know kind of from doing my band's taxes or not doing them, but helping kind of do some of the bookkeeping and prepare for the taxes, is not only being able to track all your income and expenses, but also keeping track of your assets, keeping track of merchandise inventory. That's kind of a big one that popped up.
Yep.
What can you tell us about that?
Well, that's where the balance sheet comes in, and that's where my discussions about the QuickBooks Self-Employed, that's one of the reasons. The QuickBooks Self-Employed doesn't have the balance sheet. On the balance sheet would be, here's all of my equipment, here's all of my merchandise. Even if you have merchandise, I should say, when you sell merchandise every year on January 1 or December 31, whichever day you want to look at it, I'm going to ask you for your inventory count, right? Because when we go out and buy our merchandise, we take the deduction as we're selling it, not as we're buying it. So that's merchandise inventory is very important. And just to take, oh gosh, I even hate to bring this up, but when touring artists run into the next issue of sales tax, and collecting sales tax on that merchandise and remitting it to the various states, which also opens up income tax issues as well. So I don't want to get too into that because we could spend a week just on that particular issue. But tracking your assets, again, as a band, tracking the assets that I use on the road, tracking the assets that my band uses in order to perform and make money versus my particular instrument. A lot of times these are mutually exclusive, right? The pedals that we need in order to play these stages across the U.S., I go up, I'm going to unpack the band, load in, and I've got all these things that are going up there because this is how we're going to create the volume on the stage for the particular venue. And sometimes those are owned by the band, where the individual instruments are owned by the musicians themselves. An unreimbursed partnership expense I know I talk about that quite a bit, but if I'm using it in more than one bucket of income, it's going to become very important. And if I'm going to walk away from my band, if you and I are in a band together and I bring my 1984 Martin guitar, I'm not going to want to leave that Martin guitar with you when I leave the band, right? I'm going to want to take it with me when I go.
Exactly. That's always been the difficult part. Like in my band, we're all partners. But we all own different equipment. Some of us own more equipment than others just because that's what our addiction may be. And none of us want our guitars or, our drums or anything like that to become property of the band because, for a number of reasons. One, if it becomes an asset of the band, you're subjecting that piece of equipment to the band's potential liability. If the band gets sued and someone wants to collect, they can take any asset of the band, including your equipment that you presumably bought. If I leave the band or get kicked out of the band, I don't want them trying to keep my stuff. Like there's lots of reasons to keep it, yours. And I think everybody really looks at it like that. Anybody that plays in a band, unless it's a huge band that has 3 identical drum sets because there's one in St. Louis and then one in Chicago and then one in Indianapolis as the tour is rolling out. You're going to look at it as yours. So. I didn't even really know about the unreimbursed band expenses, and Michelle informed me that my band has actually been filing our taxes incorrectly, or at least we've been individually writing off our expenses incorrectly the recent years. So we're going to have to address that. But again, that's
easily addressed in your partnership agreement. Each band member is responsible for the payment of and the care of their own individual, instruments. Certainly. Now it becomes an unreimbursed partnership expense. It's eligible for deduction on Schedule E alongside your K1 and problem solved. Not owned by the band and written off by the individual, taxpayer. Yeah.
Because the last thing you want to do is end up making $0 at the end of the year because you had to spend all the money you made on strings and pedals and just stuff to keep you going, and then end up getting taxed on it, come April.
Right.
You shouldn't have to. That's not really the IRS's intent, as long as you're following the rules. So play by the rules. Most of the time, as a musician, it seems like most of the time it can help you because, we're not known for making a ton of money in the music business, unless we really strike the pot of gold.
But people do, and I think that's an important thing. I don't know a single musician who wakes up and says, "I don't want to make money today."
Yeah.
Right? It just happens to be one of the most difficult things, especially artists that are touring. When you're constantly on the road, you're constantly moving. All of these things are constantly happening. But if that is the goal, then to sound ridiculous for a minute, we don't want to plan for lack of success. We want to plan for success. And so planning for success ultimately gives us the most control and the most realistic opportunity for success. So that's true whether people are a musician or a line operator.
Yeah, exactly. And to be clear, even though we're going into, some reasonable depth on all these details, you don't have to know everything that we know to run a business properly. I mean, you just have to have the right documents in place to get started, and make sure that you're good about keeping track of your expenses. Make sure that you follow some other fairly basic rules that everybody in business has to follow, and that's really all you have to do as an artist to set yourself up for success at this point. Just use good information. Use as much good information as you can. You don't have to know it all.
90% of the artists that I have worked with over the past 3 years have come to me, and they were paying their taxes on October the 15th. Extremely stressful, extremely expensive, and extremely disruptive to their music world. And what my goal is with all clients, but musicians in particular, just because I have my passion is definitely in the music arena. But the goal is to try to get people making quarterly estimated taxes and paying their taxes or filing their taxes at the most appropriate time. That's not April for everyone. Extensions can be had, but a number of musicians that I have worked with over the years, when we've transitioned them from literally paying their taxes on October the 15th on some credit card that they don't know how the hell they're going to pay, to making quarterly estimated taxes, filing, they're spending much less time on their business of music and spending more time on what they love about music, and that's the goal. That's what we want to do, is get people not stressed out about their taxes one day out of every year, or even understanding how much money that they made, right? If you know, I'll try to finish this up here, but if you know that when you go on a particular tour that you make money, and let's just say that it's the Midwest, and that when you go down to Texas, you don't make any money, right? Because you've got the information that shows you that. You're going to treat how you do those parts of the tours completely different. You're going to think about them differently. You're going to look at them differently. You're going to consider gigs differently. Am I taking this gig because I'm just trying to get from point A to point B? And those are just really innocent and side questions that can be answered by keeping records and looking at your financial information more than one day a year, because you've got to prepare your taxes.
I wanted to touch on kind of going back when you were talking about planning ahead and talking about gear. It's something that we touched on when we were in the green room virtually here.
Insurance.
Gear insurance. And I know I have some personal experience with gear insurance, unfortunately. But how important is that for someone who maybe doesn't have a ton of gear, maybe isn't traveling all across the country? What should they invest in as far as insurance? And what's the difference between possibly like renter's insurance or something like that? Do you guys have any knowledge on that you can share with us?
So part of my law practice is suing insurance companies for people. I get a ton of pleasure out of it because as a lawyer, I'm supposed to hate insurance companies. It's just one of those, classic feuds. And it's great. I enjoy every moment of it, really. But what I've learned about insurance companies in the cases that I've worked on, and maybe some people out there have experienced this themselves, but the insurance broker, the guy selling you the policy, wants you to buy it, and it will tell you almost anything that you want to hear to get you to buy it. The claims examiner is trying to find any reason possible to deny paying your claim. So just keep that in mind. If you get a policy that's a little bit sloppy, it will be denied. I mean, unless somehow you pull a rabbit out of a hat and know somebody at the insurance company. But I've seen cases where a guy who filled vending machines was driving around in his car in Grand Rapids, had some like Nutter Butters in the back or something, got into a car accident because he was transporting stuff that went into a vending machine from, his home to the vending machine. His insurance company refused to pay for the damage to his car, even though he had, full coverage. You see that a lot with, with car collisions in the band, / commercial context too. If you're traveling to a show, that's a commercial route you're taking. If the insurance company gets wind that you were on your way to the show when you got into a car accident, especially if it was a bad accident that has a lot of potential liability, they're going to say, sorry, I mean, you lied to us. You weren't using this for personal use. You're using it for commercial use. We're not going to pay that claim. It's exceeded the scope of our coverage. They do this. They do this all the time. So you have to make sure you get a commercial policy for any vehicle, not any vehicle, but if you have a dedicated band vehicle, you want to make sure that it's commercially insured. And I mean, really, if you're using one band member's own car to drive to a lot of gigs, you're kind of getting into a risky area there, and you might want to consider getting a commercial rider on your individual policy. And you do that just by contacting your insurance salesman. The same thing goes for gear. I see a lot of disinformation out there about this, and I've experienced it in different ways. A lot of people think that because they've got renter's insurance or because they've got homeowner's insurance that their stuff is insured. Some people may even think that everything in the trailer is insured just because the trailer is insured or just because they have a good renter's insurance policy. The fact of the matter is none of it's insured. If you don't disclose to your insurance company that you're using it for commercial purposes, they will once again deny your claim if they find out that it was stolen sitting outside of a club in Illinois. You know what I mean? Like, that's not a risk that I would assume just having my guitars here in my house, and that's actually happened to me before. Luckily, the person returned it at 4 a.m. to the bar. I don't know what happened there, but didn't have to file a claim. But you want to make sure that you've got your own policy, really. I mean, if you've got an existing renter's policy, if you've got an existing homeowner's policy, all you have to do is call up your agent and say, hey, I want to add a commercial rider to cover my musical equipment. On my policy, that's called an inland marine rider. I don't know why it's called that, but that's what it is. And on the application form, make sure you over-disclose, because these insurance agents they probably don't understand exactly what it is that you're doing. And the more that you can write on the application form, the further you get from them alleging fraud later on. And again, I mean, I've litigated plenty of cases where the insurance application document was relevant to the case. And they're like, well, you didn't say that here. It's like, well, I'm handwriting on my application using this in a band to tour the country and play shows, not even in a box where they're asking me any questions. I'm just putting it on there. And I think that with insurance companies, you're better off over-disclosing rather than under-disclosing, because if something goes wrong, they're going to try to find any way they can to refuse paying you, and you want to make sure that you prevent them from doing so.
And from a tax standpoint, it's a tax-deductible expense. Insurance is a business expense. It's deductible and will reduce your taxable income.
Yeah, so, I mean, yeah, it's worth having for many reasons. You really do need it. I know some bigger bands have like their own liability insurance too. I mean, you hear situations where a stage collapses or something like that. It depends on who owns the stage, who's in control. But if you're playing really big shows and you're kind of concerned about opening up a lot of band assets to potential liability, if you've got a lot of band assets, it might make sense to start looking into some sort of errors and omissions or just general liability policy as well. But I mean, my band doesn't have one, and I don't plan to get one anytime soon. Really, it's just gear and vehicle. That's kind of the big stuff.
Chris, I know I signed a contract today when I was booking a band, and they had a clause in their contract about the type of insurance that I have to carry as a venue and how much. And that kind of brings us to a whole nother world of contracts. And if you have had any similar experiences, I see a lot of contracts that are from like LegalZoom or what's the other one, where it's just like you pay a monthly fee and they give you any contract template in the book. And like you said earlier, with the operating agreement, there's like the wrong state in there, and then all kinds of crazy stuff. Can you speak to probably a booking contract would be the most basic thing that we see every single time we play a gig, hopefully.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
You need booking contracts. You need them. And so I remember the first few years of us being a band, before we had an agent, before we had any sort of, sense really, we would sign up for shows on a phone call basically, and then show up. That was just kind of it. Maybe we forgot some. I don't even know how we were really keeping these organized. But we did, I guess, and they all paid, luckily. But there have been several situations with my band where a venue hasn't paid, and so and there have been other situations too that we've had to address, where the contract that we ended up having was so crucial. And again, this is one of those things that, I don't know who's writing contracts for LegalZoom. Maybe it's a qualified person, maybe it's not, but I highly doubt they are experienced in the entertainment industry enough to write a good booking contract, and they're not that tough. I mean, I've got templates set up already. I mean, we use our own contract all the time. We always send our contract out. These are our terms. Like, this is how you're going to get us to show up. Now, you don't want to play that hand too hard. You don't want to scare people away, but you also want to show them that, hey, we're a serious band here. We have our own contract. These are our terms. If you want to negotiate, cross stuff out, or let's talk about it, and we can go from there. But liability insurance is always one of the things that I see. It's one of the things that we have in our contract, and it's one of the things that I always see in other contracts too. And it's usually like $1 million that the venue has to carry in case of some sort of tragedy. I think, like, if there's a fire and all your equipment burns or something like that. I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's really contemplating personal injury too much, but from an artist perspective, you want as much as you can possibly have in your contract that helps you, and that's one of those things that helps you. Other big things that you have to address in the contract, of course, are the date of the show, where it's going to be located. I mean, these are material terms that you need to have. You need to have a payment amount, and if there's a deposit, you want to be able to specify whether that's refundable, whether it's not refundable, how it's going to be held. If it's not refundable, you don't have to put it in a trust account. If it is, you might have to put it in a trust account, which means you got to go to your bank, create one of those. So make it non-refundable, maybe. Force majeure clauses, if there's inclement weather, the artist wants to get paid. If I drive to Nevada to play a show and a thunderstorm rolls through, I still got to get paid, and it's the venue's job, in my mind, as an artist, to procure event insurance to cover that. If they don't, I guess I don't feel that bad, because they should probably do that. COVID sections in contracts are more popular lately, and I think right now, I don't think we're going to see very many shows in the near future here, so this might not be super relevant, but in the summer, this was coming up. Like, if the venue isn't going to comply with the state's requirements on social distancing and on, the coronavirus restrictions, and like, the artist has the right to walk away and still get paid the full amount. Nobody wants to get sick. Nobody wants to get hurt. Nobody wants to lose money as an artist. We don't want to lose our equipment. So it's really important to have a good booking contract that has all these things in there. And it's another reason that it's a good idea to write your own booking contract, because you can put your choice of law provision in there. Say, okay, choice of law is Michigan, venue is Kent County, Michigan. In my case, that's where I put it. And so if someone in Nebraska doesn't pay you, you can sue them here in Kent County, and you're probably going to win just because they can't show up. You know what I mean? Like, you need to be able to enforce your contract as well, and that's why it's important to have a well drafted one. I work with people all the time on that. I've got templates that I use, and they work great for us. And we've sued people before, and we've won. So they do work, and it's worth having them.
Michelle, I wanted to ask, from a venue standpoint, you're talent buying all the time, and probably doing and seeing a lot of different contracts from different bands. Is there anything that sticks out to you that you expect from a band, or that really impresses you about a contract?
No, I would say they're very the contracts that I see everywhere from the longest contract I ever received was a 37-page contract from the William Morris Agency for an artist named Milo, who is super big in Sweden, who played here once. But by and large, they have the aspect of what's the date, what's the payment, any agreed upon provisions like, hospitality, any venue share. Most of them say that artists that come here are coming as independent contractors, so they're not employees of Seven Steps Up, and that they are independent contractors. And we do maintain general liability insurance as a venue for. I mean, it covers both the bodily injury and property damage due to anything that would happen on site, right? So I would say most of the contracts that I've seen also states that the artist will carry their own insurance. They need to have insurance on theirs as well, but because we're only responsible for anything that happens while they're in the venue. We're not responsible to and from, the venue or anything else. But I've seen so many contracts over the past 10 years. There's, other than I can say, they all say the date, the time, and the amount. There's very little. I will tell you that I mark out a lot of things on contracts. Things that say, like, we have to carry $10 million of insurance. I mark it out and say we'll carry $1 million. That's what we carry. We carry $1 million because that's appropriate for our venue. So, I don't think that I don't believe that I've ever had an artist play here without a contract, even if that contract is an email. But I have had email contracts that also specify the payment and that type of arrangement, and sometimes that's what it is.
And I think to be clear too, a contract doesn't have to be written, right? So I guess, if you find yourself in a situation where you're like, oh man, I don't have, an 8-page signed agreement for this. I mean, are they even bound? Am I even bound? You are. I mean, if there's been a meeting of the minds between two people where there's going to be something, in exchange for compensation, that's a contract. If you've got it in an email if you've got a whole long email chain laying out all the details, that will suffice as a contract. Now, it's going to be a much more difficult issue to litigate if you have to do it, which is the only reason we talk about contracts, because, that's how you enforce them most of the time. But, it's something. The nice thing about a contract, and this is where, I guess this is kind of the advice that I should have given first about the booking contract, and really any contract that anybody uses in business or, particularly music. There has to be a clause about the shifting of attorney fees. And you want to make sure that the prevailing party, at the very least, gets their attorney fees paid for. Sometimes you can even sneak it into contract where the artist gets their attorney fees paid for if there's ever any litigation. Don't put that in the contract that you're going to use with Michelle, because that would just be not fair, and she would cross it out and definitely change it. But, at the very least, the prevailing party should be entitled to attorney fees. And the reason you do that is because some of these shows, if it's a $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 show, you may not be inclined to hire an attorney to help you collect on that if you don't get paid, just because you're like, oh, it's going to cost me more than that just to get it, to get the money back. But if you've got an attorney, a fee shifting provision in your contract, you're going to get the amount, your $2,000, $3,000 and whatever amount your attorney charged you. I mean, the court's not going to write you a check right away, and you still got to collect from the other person, but it's a level of security that makes it so you can actually enforce your contract. And what good is the contract if you're not going to enforce it? I think some other things that go along with booking contracts, we always hear about the rider. It's not just a document where you write down all the things that you excessively want.
Green M&Ms.
Yeah. Although I guess there is apparently that provision was in Van Halen. The brown M&M provision was in Van Halen's contract because their road manager wanted to see if people were actually reading the document, which is a pretty good way of figuring that out. But
with Bon Jovi, you can't have pink anywhere in the venue.
I think we're going to start, using that one
Isn't
in
that
ours
crazy?
too. So yeah, I mean, it's not just for stuff like that. It's helpful. I mean, a lot of times, the rider it may lay out if your contract doesn't have it, because the rider is an attachment to the contract. It's a rider. It rides on the contract. Um, Things like lodging, there might be like some free meals if the venue has food, or even if they don't, maybe they'll just, pay, comp you out some food. Um, a stage plot, that's a part of our rider, our tech requirements, which largely go unfollowed. I mean, if they're hiring us, they probably have a decent sound system and it's fine. But if you have certain requirements, like you need X number of, these types of subs because you're doing, a certain type of DJ thing, you want that spelled out. You want that all part of your contract so that they can't say, no, it wasn't in there.
Well, and as a venue, I can just tell you, we want to know, I mean, even things like dietary preferences, we want to know them before people get there, right? We want to know, is there backline, is there, and for the most part, those things are all discussed as a part of the original contract, right? If you come to me walking in my door during load in and say, well, I need a set of drums, I may or may not be able to accommodate that. But when I get the contract and it says the venue is responsible for providing the drums, the pianos, and the amps, which is a real common thing for us actually, then I know it and I can negotiate that into my original cost of providing those things as a part of the contract. So as a venue, I'm very appreciative of getting that information ahead of time, up front and ahead of time, as a part of the contract. And you would be surprised the number of times that we were prepared for a solo artist and met a band at the door, or vice versa, right? Because even touring is such a complicated thing. Even when people get it right, 95% of the time, there's always going to be issues.
Yeah, I know. We put parking, how many comps we need.
Yep.
It's crazy. It'll look a lot like a contract sometimes because it kind of is. But yeah, I know that helps from the venue aspect so much, and it just makes, even if you're a solo artist, the level of professionalism that adds. You're taking it beyond the email. You're setting some expectations, and like you said earlier, Michelle, everyone always, you should do those things when you're all smiling and getting along. Put it all out there, what could happen, what might happen, and how it's going to be handled now, so that everything goes smoothly later. That's really good advice.
Well, that's what everybody wants at the end of the day, right? We want a successful show, and the happier and more successful we can be comes from that planning and the things that we do before you step on the stage, before you open up that door, before you get in the vehicle and start driving to that gig, right? I mean, there's all of those things. I will say and I would say 95% of the contracts and bookings that we do is through a booking agent, and they're gonna have their own each individual agency has their own contracts.
Yeah. Guys, it is almost 8:30, so
Holy crap.
I just want to start wrapping it up. I know there's so much more we could cover, and I'm glad this is archived because it was a ton of information, and people can go back and watch it later. And I really think we probably need to do a second session where we deep dive more about contracts and royalties and some of the things that I know you've dealt with, Chris, and you too, Michelle. This is an awesome pairing. I can't believe you two hadn't met before.
I know.
And I'm really glad that we could introduce you. And it's been a perfect back and forth and a perfect combination. You guys should take this show on the road and do small business startups or something, because it's very complimentary. So we appreciate your time. Do you guys have any closing, what's your closing thought? If there's one takeaway that if you want people to take, what would that one idea be? Michelle, do you want to start? over there?
I think probably my one takeaway would be business records. If you don't have a good handle and a good process for that, that would be the first thing that I would look at. And I think Chris said something about it. You don't have to be an expert in everything related to business. You just need to have the tools available and have someone to ask. And that's when people ask me how I pay less in taxes, it's keep good records. When people ask me how can I be more successful, it's keep good records. So keeping good records is really paramount to any successful business venture, whether it be in music or anything else.
Chris, what about you? Oh, I think you muted yourself. Hang on. Or I muted you. I don't know. Oh, no. You can't.
I don't hear anybody now. So, can people hear me? Can someone just put something in you can hear? All right. Well, I'm not sure what happened to her, but thanks everyone for coming out. Thank you to the Michigan Music Alliance. 7 Steps Up is a huge supporter for the Alliance, and grateful that they're around. I think that these types of conversations and discussions can really make the difference for people in terms of your music careers and the business of music. Elle? Okay, so I think I will just say good night to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned for more from Elle and the B-side session of Michigan Music Alliance.